I'm Quentin Compton Bishop. I think most of you know me, but for those that don't, I'm the chair of the Levantine Heritage Foundation, and our co-host this evening is Craig Enser, the founder and general secretary of the foundation. I'm just going to go through some of the events that are coming up before we have our speaker. So let me just show you some of those. If my PowerPoint will move on. There we go. So we're trying to have 2 events a month while we're in this sort of lockdown mode. Of course, we'd like to come back and have events in person in the main cities where people are, but we anticipate that we will have this program of 2 events a month running through to the summer at least. So coming up, our next event on the 13th of April is actually going to be in French, where our trustee, Philippe Mansell, whom many of you will know, is going to give a talk on the Venetians in the Levant. So this is really a new initiative for us to reach people for whom French is one of their languages. We have quite a few members and supporters in France and in other Francophone countries, and we would like to build our network there. So the talk is about the enduring sort of persistence of the Venetians in the Levant. Philip will talk from the history all the way through to the remaining influence of the Venetians and mention some of the families who are well-known Levantine families like the Pisani, de Righello, Marco Poli, and so on. So if you are interested in that, 13th of April, Philip Mansell. Then on the 22nd of April, we've got Gianpaolo Salice, who's going to talk about the Alexianos transnational Greek family, who were quite entrepreneurial in many ways, ended up working with the British. So quite an interesting and dynamic story of this particular family. We will announce some other speakers in the next month. These will be on our website. The website is going to have some changes to the homepage in particular, trying to make it easier. We will still highlight our own events. We'll still promote other relevant events, and we'll also highlight some of the research calls and requests for information that some of our members put to us. We have a newsletter coming out towards the end of this month, and in it will be a number of research requests asking for information that could be related to families, could be related to other things. But if any of you are pursuing research, would like to make contact with our wider membership, please get in touch either through the email on the screen now or directly with Craig, which is secretary@levantineheritage.com. As always, we are mainly supported in 2 ways. One, by the membership subscriptions, and 2, by the generous support of a variety of sponsors and donors. Some of them going back a long way, but their influence is still very important. And we'd just like to thank them at each opportunity for their support. It's very important to us. It's particularly important when we organize our big events. So in the past, we've had international conferences in Istanbul, Athens, London. These are expensive for us, and without the support of our donors, they would be impossible to put on. And also the website, while the basic costs may be low, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I'd just like to pay thanks and tribute to Craig Enser, who donates much of his time to keep that going. Now I'd like to introduce Berna Kamay, our speaker this evening. And I'm just going to give a little bit on her background. So Berna Kamay is a doctoral candidate in the history department at Boğaziçi University. She worked as a research and teaching assistant in the same department. She specializes in the late Ottoman Empire, Ottoman legal history, and European Ottoman diplomatic encounters. Her dissertation traces the extradition practice in the 19th century Ottoman Empire. As a particular legal concept and a diplomatic tool, the subject qualifies for a broader analytical perspective. It accompanies a wide range of issues, such as the capitulations, contests of sovereignty, territorial jurisdiction, subjecthood, and conflicts of laws. And the subject is Frenkhâne of Rossi, an inheritance story from a port city of Smyrna. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to transfer to Berna, and if you would like to share your screen, please, and begin. Now, before you begin, please keep your microphones on mute. You may turn off your videos, and we'll have questions afterwards. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do it in various ways. You can turn on your video and wave physically with a hand. You can use the Zoom raise hand function, or you could write a question in the chat function. I will pick that up and I will then invite you to put your question. So without any more from me, I'd like to pass to Berna Kamay. Welcome, Berna. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you. I would like to first of all thank Quinton Compton Bishop and Craig Enser for inviting me tonight. This is a pleasure to have this occasion to present one of my earlier research. Actually, I'm more interested and concentrated on criminal law in the Ottoman Empire, but inheritance disputes were one of my early research, and which I still really keen on delving into in the future time. So this gives me a kind of opportunity to extend my research on this area. Today I'm going to talk about Frenkhâne of Rossi, Frank house located in the old Ottoman city of Smyrna and Izmir. Today is Izmir, actually 19th century Ottoman port city. And I'll try to give a glimpse of an inheritance dispute that occurred among the family members of Rossi, Frank House of Rossi, actually. But before giving details on this legal dispute, I would like to first make a very brief introduction of this Ottoman port city, Smyrna, and its development from the 17th century up to the 19th century developments. Sorry. While always an important city forming a bridge between the different regions of Anatolia and other parts of the empire, Smyrna or Izmir experienced a real expansion in the 17th century actually. By then, the commercial heart of the city was already concentrated around the ancient castle known as Kale, as you can also see from the map, and the environs of this castle. Local economy and commercial activities could be traced by the functions of complex buildings or inns known as khans. And the most famous of them at the time back then were Büyük Vezir, Küçük Vezir, and Kızlar Ağası. And located close by the Hisar Mosque, these buildings were the representatives of the traditional built environment of the Ottoman cities as well. By the late 19th century, we also witnessed the development of economic activities extending towards the seashore. seaside of the city. Increasing number of European merchants who were given the concessions known as berat to trade freely in the Ottoman Empire, which was thanks to the capitulation system, began residing in the merchant houses built at the seaside, renewing their concessions contractually on contract base, frequently after a few years of time. Those people spent years in the empire, and they were also later began to be known as Levantines. Most of these people were coming from Italian, French, and English nationalities. In time, they contributed to the expansion of Frank Quarter, which you can see from the orange spot here on the map, and while at the same time, Greek and Armenian quarters also became visible by the end of the 17th century. If you have a look at the map, famous drawing of Cornelius de Bruyn dating back to the 17th century, we can see how the port city of Smyrna was back then seen in a kind of panoramic way. We can see the Frank Street just on the left side, and then Armenian quarter, Greek quarters, who actually began to develop at a later time compared to the Turkish and Jewish quarters. And we can also see the ancient castle Kadifekala and the famous cemetery and the tomb of St. Polycarp. And when we come to the 19th century, by the beginning of the 19th century, with all these interaction of Muslim, Jewish, Greek, and European populations, the city transformed into a hub of commerce and thus cultural encounters. The atmosphere back then can only be explained as the new dynamism of a urban port city. This was mainly due to the changing phase of the city as a consequence of the urban reforms carried out to develop the landscape and to promote infrastructural development. The establishment of the municipalities came along with an elaborate bureaucratic structure. With the construction of the port, which started actually in the 1863 and continued at a time period, the foreign merchants no longer restricted in their activities to the seashores, and no longer they had to reside in these places located just next to the seaside. Rather, they moved inside the city along with moving and transferring their commercial activities to the core of the center of the local community. Stone buildings, called as Frank houses, were constructed with the aim of pursuing commercial activities and serving as residences for the merchants, also called as Frenkhâne or Frenkhâne in Turkish. These passageways stood side by stretching along narrow and long street known as Rue Frank, after the French, and Frank Street in English. You can see from the blue line, the Frank Street actually, moved and extended along a very long stretch of line close to the seashore. In the beginning, these buildings were used mainly as storehouses, providing the transfer of goods and import-export products to the pier at the seaside. To achieve this end, particular gateway doors were opened at the backside of the buildings to serve the purpose. The construction of the port changed the function of Frank houses actually in time. As Zandi Sayek describes, the work of Sber Zandi Sayek on the Ottoman port city of Smyrna is a very famous one, if you would like to have a look at it. She describes these buildings as composed of two floors actually. The first floor of these buildings crowded with many shops of various economic affiliations, while the second floor became homes to many foreigners. Sayek also speculates that the European merchants were first placed to the seashore buildings on purpose, as the Ottoman government had the aim of controlling their movements more at ease. However, in time, the city landscape gradually adapted to the needs of the demographic and economic changes. And many churches, each representing their own communities, also emerged around that location. Along with them, printing companies, foreign banks, consuls also shared the similar and same space where one can feel the pulse of a bustling city. You can see this is a very late 19th century map of a Smyrna German map. Actually, I couldn't date the exact timing of it, but from the place that I just took it indicated this one. And you can see the how many consulates and Ottoman bank were located alongside one another at a close region. And we can also see a church here, Hagia Fotini Church here. It's important because it is just next to the Frenkhâne of Rossi that I'm interested in. And we can also realize from this map also how the quarters of Smyrnian port region were still in portions like the Turkish quarter, then comes the Armenian quarter, then comes the Greek quarter, and just before them lies along the Rue Frank. As I already said, this famous Rue Frank is a very narrow and long line of streets, which is consisted of many buildings that stood side by side and had different economic affiliations. Actually, I detected the location of Frenkhâne, Frank House of Rossi, first from the insurance map of Goat, the famous person, civil engineer Charles Goat, which dated back to 1905. And he prepared these maps to the clients of insurance companies, mainly against the risk of fire that could occur in these cities. And along with this map of Smyrna, actually, there were two other identical examples produced for the Ottoman Empire, and they were the examples of Istanbul and Alexandria. And by having a closer inspection of the location, I found out that Rossi Frank House was just situated a few miles away from the famous Hagia Fotini, or San Fotini Church, which was unfortunately devastated by the fire of 1922 and no longer exists, and along with many other buildings, unfortunately. And this was exactly the crossroads location linking the two streets known as Mahmudiye and Sultaniye streets. And the pictures taken from the late century shows that at this intersection there was also the Bank of Athens, which started functioning at a very later date in 1893. Before the Bank of Athens, I'm not sure how this building was functioning or ever it existed, but this gives us at least an idea of where the Frenkhâne of Rossi was located. When one will take the right line that goes to the Mahmudiye Street, you can see from the red cross, he or she could reach the Rossi Frank House just in a few minutes. And on the other side of it, located the San Fotini Church. And when you move backwards, you can reach the Sultaniye Street. And in the same neighborhood, along with this San Fotini, you can see the dome of it. We have also Greek Church of St. George and the Armenian Church of St. Stephen's. Greek Church of St. George was dated back to the 17th century, whereas the Armenian Church of St. Stephen's just built in 1863. Among all of them were very famous and important for their communities. But if you just focus on the Church of St. Fotini, it was a very famous and important Greek church, which also dated back to 17th century, 1658, and destructed a decade later and rebuilt in 1690. And in 1856, it is represented because of its tower, 33 meters of tower, which was built and erected in 1856 just to memorize and glorify the death and the exact death age of Jesus Christ, who died in 33, who believed to be died in 33 years old. And in 1892, a large clock was also added to this tower, and it became highly important both for the Greek community and for the metropolitan bishop of this community. And if you can also see from the picture of Rebellion Fields dating back to the 1870s, we just seen the reproduction of it. We can see again the three churches that located in the close nearby region to one another. And if you would like to have a close snapshot of them, we can see their closer images in this way. If we just focus on Frenkhâne Rossi from the map of goats, I realized that it just stands in the middle of other important commercial buildings, and where each one of which actually we can just list as Credit Lyoness, Verhane Arapyan, Verhane Peştemalcioğlu, Nikola Diaz Printing House, just here. And then comes Verhane Rossi, and American Tobacco, we can see just, it's not maybe clear, but then comes Verhane Yusufoğlu, Verhane Sofianopoulou, Verhane Baltazi, the famous Baltazi family, and Orient Bank. And this goes along to the other streets as well. Each of these frank houses had many shops and industries going on inside. Actually, if we just have a look at the Frenkhâne of Rossi, I can just detect 4 important of them: Christopheres Tobacco Shop, and a shop which sells bag, a shop dealing with carpentry, and a shop of clothing. And if I just come to the main core issue of this talk, there's this inheritance dispute among the members of the Rossi family, which lasted for more than 22 years without any concrete result and decision in favor of any parts. Actually, I collected the maps and all these documents both from the Ottoman archive and from the consular archive of nuns, both of which includes various and numerous documents and correspondences, and the debt lists of the people who were actually making business with these people, and the renters of this Frenkhâne Rossi as well. Before moving to the debate itself, I would like to show a family tree of Rossi family. Who are these people, and who own the right of exercising and usufructing this Frenkhâne of Rossi? The owner of Frenkhâne Rossi, of course, here the word owner is a very tricky one, because in the Ottoman Empire, especially before the second half of the 19th century, there was no legal right for the Ottoman subjects and, of course, the foreign subjects to own any immovable property. But what I'm talking about here by meaning owning, I'm talking about meaning the right of exercising ownership, right of using these buildings in return of rent, actually, which is called as usufruction or exercise of right in both terms, with nuances, of course. And here 2 sisters, Marie Macroniti and Marie Madeleine Macroniti, who married 2 brothers, actually, very interesting story, and brother Balthazar Rossi and Philippe Antoine Rossi. I'm not sure of the origins of Macronitis, whether they are French, not French, I guess, but maybe Italian, but most probably Greek. But I'm sure that Philippe Antoine Rossi and Balthazar Rossi were of French origin, but both of them actually born and lived for a while in Greece, especially the islands of Cyclades, the famous islands that we know as very touristic places today. One of these islands they born, most probably, because that's how I can just detect their place of birth. And most of them died in Smyrna, some of them died in the cities of France, but this family has a connection with French origin and Greek origin, I guess. And if you have a look at how this property right just given to the Rossi family, I can just give you an idea about this transfer of the title deed. Title deed, which is known in the Ottoman Turkish as temessuk, is the one that I'm exactly talking about. The right to give someone, mostly both the foreign subjects, not foreign subjects, sorry, non-Muslim and Muslim subjects of the Ottoman Empire, to exercise their right of usage, or usufruction, which is known as tasarruf hakkı, exercise of rights. And we see that Frenkhâne of Rossi actually belonged to the Vakf Pius Foundation of Hacı Veli Cami and Hacı Veli Vakf, belonging to Smyrna, in the Smyrna. And the administrator, who is known as Mütevelli, Refika Hanım, just provided the title rights, temessuk, to the sisters Marie Macroniti and Madeleine Macroniti in the year 1817. But what happened is that, unfortunately, Madeleine Rossi and her husband Philip Rossi died at a very early age because of cholera in 1831. And here I just detected the cemetery stone of them, which says that here lies Antoine Philippe Rossi and Marie-Madeleine Rossi, died of cholera. They lived as good Christians, facing the ailments of this life with resignation and courage. They left behind children who were disconsolate of their loss, but they were the example of their virtues and eternal regrets. Because of the early death of Marie-Madeleine Rossi, all the rights just passed to her only sister Marie Macroniti, who died just a decade later in 1844 without leaving behind any children. That's why this exercise of rights again was given, this time by the daughter of Refika Hanım, to the daughters of Madeleine Macroniti, who has actually 4 children. But according to the authorities, by a very mystical testament, Madeleine Macroniti, just before her death, gave testament to share the equal proportion of rights of this Frenkhâne just to Marianne Victoire Rossi, who later married to Black, Alexander George Black, then later to Frisnecker, but I couldn't detect the first name of this person, then Hélène Girard Rossi. If you have a look back the same picture, we see that actually they should divide this property into 4 equal portions, because there are also Marie-Irène Rossi, who later married to Bousquet de Champs, this famous Jacques-Lucien Bousquet de Champs, the owner of Journal de Constantinople, director of the Courrier de Smyrna and Journal de Smyrna. And there's also Joseph Rossi, who died according to the reports, at an early age, but I couldn't detect the exact timing of his death. But only Marianne Victoire Rossi and Hélène Girard got this right of using the Frenkhâne of Rossi. So here there's a kind of inequality of the issue, and because of that there occurred some protests and rejections by the other heirs. And the first protest came from Jacques-Lucien Bousquet de Champs. Because of the death of his wife, he has to protect the rights of his children, and he protested against this right to the Consulate General of Smyrna by saying that he wants the sale put on auction of the shares of this building, and to be divided in return in equal portions into 3 portions. To protect the rights of all heirs, actually. And it results in fact that Marianne Victoire Frisnecker, or Black, and Hélène Girard were given false temessuk by the Mütevelli Hatice, and by means of this title they spoiled the rights of the minors, other heirs. The consulate accused the Mütevellis of the Vakf, alleging that those individuals were not subject to any surveillance, referring to the Mütevelli, and do not keep records of the transfer process. As a result of which, in 1847, the case was brought to the attention of the Shari Court of Smyrna, which was presided by Mullah of the city, the high echelon of this Shari Court, and which assembled at Konak, in the presence of also the governor of the city, Smyrna, and also the presence of the French representative, Baron de Noircia. In the end, they gave the decision that they need to provide 3 new temessuk titles for each parties, and they declared the old ones as null. So from then on, both Marie-Irène Rossi and her children, Marianne Victoire Rossi and Hélène Girard, will be the equal shares of the heir. However, at this point, an extraordinary scene occurred while the president of the court was reading the decision. Mariam Victoire Rossi Frenkhâne snatched the title deeds from Molla from his hands and torn them into pieces, as she could not relinquish the right given to her in the first place. She was condemned, as a result of which, of course, she was condemned to 6 months of imprisonment because of her acting in this way. And it was such a shock for the people in the presence of this court, because, and this actually resulted partially from the fact that Madame Frenkhâne enjoyed a privilege among the high echelons of bureaucratic community and intellectual circle of Constantinople, because, as I already said, she was the ex-wife of Alexander George Black, who was the founder of the newspaper Spectateur Oriental and Moniteur Ottoman. And on the other side, she was the mother of Edouard Edme Jean Black, who was known as Black Bey in the Ottoman circles, an important and famous Ottoman diplomat who was appointed as the ambassador of Washington in the midst of the civil war going on in the United States. And later on, he just moved along the line of the bureaucratic echelons and ended up with being the director of the 6th department of the municipality of Istanbul, actually. So before that time, Frenkhâne also requested letters of the recommendation from some eminent persons to overturn the protests of Deschamps, which actually this result in a failure. In the end, 3 temessuks were provided. However, just a decade later, another heir, the son Joseph Rossi, appeared. Right now, if we just turn back to the same picture, we see Joseph Rossi already died, but his son Anton August Rossi appeared, and he demanded his rights as another 4th heir of this property. But what happened at this time is that there's a conflict of nationality at this point, because Antoine Auguste Rossi, even though he claimed that he was residing in the Ottoman Empire for the last 15 years, he was a French subject, and there are some doubts about his being a protege, and that's why, to guarantee his claims for the title deed, which is known as temessuk, he first made his claim to the court at Montpellier in France, and then to the Court of Cassation to Besançon, which is interesting in a way, because even though the foreign subjects enjoy the capitulation rights, still, especially the inheritance disputes, were totally restricted to the local competency. And what he was trying to do at the time was not acceptable according to both Ottoman laws and according to the authorities of the French court, because the French authorities in Besançon and Montpellier later they said that you should go to the court of Smyrna and apply to the local court to proceed in this way. And again, to guarantee his rights and also acknowledging his wrong attempt, at this time, Antoine Auguste Rossi sent a petition to Abdülaziz, the Sultan Abdülaziz of the time, requesting that his rights should be overseen, actually. And through the channel of governor of Smyrna, Abdülaziz responded to him saying that, okay, you should apply to the court and your rights will be try to be seen according to the justice of the court. And in the end, what happened is that because of the nationality of Antoine Auguste Rossi, he was not given any title deed. And at the same time, of course, Mariam Victoire Rossi and Hélène Girard also pursued their claims and protests against Antoine Auguste Rossi, similar to Jacques Lucien Bouquet Deschamps, because they thought that they were Ottoman subjects, reayas, but he was French subject, so there's no way that he can intervene in their own rights in this way. So what happened in the end? I'm just trying to give a brief proceeding of this event, because later on I need to delve into why these things happening in this way and why there's no satisfactory result in the end. What happened in the end is that after 1860s, still the case was in an ambiguous condition for more than 22 years, and none of the shares of the Frank house was on sale, and none of the heirs who were allegedly legitimate heirs of this property were given their rights in equal portion. And what happens in 1875 is that they receive a petition, a kind of official letter from the mütevelli of this Hacı Veli Vakf, saying that you should submit the keys of this Frenkhâne house to our Vakf foundation, because you have no longer any right to hold any usufructory right or exercise of right in this building. You have no connection anymore from then on, they say. And as I realized later on, the case just stands in ambiguity at this point, and only if I have a look at map dating back to 1889, I see that we still can see Frenkhâne of Rossi, which was mentioned. The half part of it stood at sale without any conclusion, and the other half was sold to the Vakf. So what happened between these years, it's not very clear, but we can only find a kind of solution to it by looking at the legal transformation in the Ottoman Empire, especially considering the property rights of foreigners and the Ottomans. Because in the Ottoman Empire, there is no right to give ownership both to non-Muslim and Muslim people, and you can only have the right of exercise only with the condition that you'll just use it and transfer it after your death. And only after 1867, there came into being the law of property rights, which also extended the privilege for the foreigners to give the right to own immovable properties, only on the condition that they should be totally subject to the Ottoman laws in all respects. No more they had the right to go to the consular authorities, because property rights in the Ottoman Empire, along with inheritance rights, were considered as totally belonging to the personal law, which will also later on change and will be in a conflictive way with the Sharia law, actually. So what I'm trying to say is that in the Ottoman Empire, there should be a testament, which is known as vasiyet, and there should be a liquidator. But before 1867, and before the emergence of the secular courts and the modern legal system, the inheritance disputes were totally under the subject of the Islamic Sharia law, and which is totally personal, and which in a way resembles to Roman law, but not to the European laws. If you just take the example of the French inheritance system, up until the 19th century, whenever a foreigner dies in the foreign lands, what happens is that the sovereign or the state took hold of all the properties of this person, regardless of the rights and desired will of their heirs. Only in the 19th century, with the Napoleon Code, this thing changed, actually. But in the Ottoman Empire, it was always under the rules of the Sharia system, which actually gives this right of transfer of the inheritance to the heirs. And it is interesting that there is also this question of nationality. In the Islamic law, whenever an Ottoman woman subject marries to a foreign subject, they could not, and they did not change their subjecthood, they could still stand as Ottoman subjects. Here, in the case of Marie Makronti and Madeleine Makronti, they were both Ottoman subjects, and they were married to two French subjects, but still, because of the Islamic law, they retained their own subjecthood. And only in this way, they had the right to exercise this right of property, Frenkhâne of Rossi. But what happened, and again with this privilege, the daughter of Madeleine Macronti, Marianne Victoire Rossi, and Hélène Girard Rossi continued to hold the right of property rights in the same way. But after a while, we see that in 1875, all of a sudden, their rights were taken from them. Because this is only could be read through the lens of the 1867 law, which changed the right of property transfer interpreted it in a kind of secular way. With the 1869 Ottoman nationality law, the Ottoman women subjects who married to foreign subjects were no longer considered as Ottoman subjects, but considered as foreign subjects. And in the Ottoman Empire, still, you cannot hold ownership of property right if you are foreign, only on the condition that you will be totally subject to the Ottoman law. In this way, these women could still would have retained the right of property right, but there comes into being the questioning of retroactivity of this law. Because before that time, they were just the usufructures, they just holding the right of usufructuary. They no longer had the right to own this property because they did not have this right before as well. And for this reason, the Vakf of Hacı Veli easily find excusing themselves to hold of all this property in their hands without giving any more rights or share of this property. What happens in the end is that after 22 years of conflict and struggle to hold the rights, there comes into no conclusion. And if you have a look at it from this perspective, we see that we should read the Ottoman legal system not just existing as just one legal transformation going in the same way, but there's this kind of plurality of Sharia law and the legal transformation in the secular system that conflicted with one another. Because up until the late 19th century, there was still no clear answer to how the property rights should be given to the foreign subjects and other Ottoman subjects as well. I would like to stop at this point. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Bernard. Excellent. If you would like to stop sharing your screen, and then that will give us an opportunity to see the other participants. Now, who would like to ask a question? Raise your hand. Oh, Achilles, you go first.
First of all, let me thank you for this excellent presentation. It's very, very important. All these family stories that add pieces to our knowledge of how Smyrna, Izmir came to be what we know it was. And I wish I had all this information when I was studying Smyrna, and in particular the Key of Smyrna. But I have two questions. First, I was wondering if you know this book. Let me, yeah, you can see it. Hold on a second, please.
I have to remove the...
It's Filippo Falbo of Agomahalastis Myrnis, the Frank, you know it?
No, I don't know it.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second, please. I'm just trying to turn off. Yep, that's the one.
But so, I couldn't read Greek.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Filippo Falbo is, he was a Smyrnian from a very known family, the Falbos, and he studied in particularly the Frank quarter of Smyrna. And he calls the Rossi Frenkhâne also Van der Zee. Have you found any relation between the two families, or was it? Yeah.
He mentioned the Frank house of Rossi in this book. I didn't know that before. No, in the Ottoman and French archives, I haven't seen any of these names.
Okay, so this is probably something that occurred around the 1920s, the last period of Smyrna before the Great Fire. And yeah, and the other question is, I was wondering, all these changes of the law and the subsequent changes of ownerships occurred around the same era that the quay was constructed, the late 1860s and the early 1870s. And as you could see in that Société de Quai map, the Rossis also acquired the new land piece that was created after the construction of the quay. It is also a Rossi property. So that made me a bit curious. What was the actual involvement of the Vakf in this entire process of selling the land? I mean, after all, it did end up in the Rossi family again. So perhaps it was a clever way to make a profit out of it by selling and reselling the rights to the different generations of the same family.
Yeah,
what do you think?
It could be reasonable because they are doing this over and over again, and in the meantime, because of there's this process of waiting for the sale at auction, and which sometimes lasts more than 10 years, and in this case, at some point, 22 years, more than this. And at this time period, according to the debates going on, the heirs were very, they were protesting actually how they couldn't even get the income coming from the rent at this time period, because most probably the Vakf Foundation just stops all the functioning of the rights on behalf of these heirs, and maybe they were also collecting these rights or just putting them at some place to later on share these things in division to equal portions. But during this time period, they took hold of the incomes coming from the rents, because there's a dispute and this dispute should be resolved. And in this case, what you're saying is quite reasonable. I haven't come across any idea about it in the reports, but yeah, we could think about it.
Thank you.
Who else has a question? Raise your hand. If not, can I ask a question about the court? So can you just explain again, when this first went to the local court, what court was it? Was it a religious court? Was it a civil court? How did it operate? How did they decide who would be the judges?
Okay, it first comes to before the first half of the century. In the first half of the century, all these inheritance disputes come to the attention of the local court, presided by the Mullah, the Shari leader of the country, as the court justice of this court. And then later on, in the second half of the century, we see that there is a conflict of disputes between different authorities, between the Shari court as the Islamic court and between the secular courts like the Minister of Councils, and also some protests also coming from the foreign ministry as well, because right now the other authorities of the empire began to claim a legitimacy in these disputes. The inheritance disputes, especially towards the late 19th century, were no longer seen as exclusively belonging to the Sharia law, and they began to be considered as common law as well. But this is a very conflictive issue, because there's no concrete decision in the way. They were also both sides always trying to give ideas and statements, legal statements on each legal disputes, which actually become conflictive both among themselves and both between these two authorities.
So you could have a dispute go to two different courts and they could issue different judgments, in effect.
That's why you cannot easily come to a conclusion about how to interpret these things, only considering the plurality of the Ottoman legal system, which came just in leaps and bounds, and trying to consolidate such kind of legal formalism, but which couldn't be reached at maturity even at the late 19th century of the empire, which is not a bad thing, but which is a kind of a gradual moving process that will continue at intervals and based on mutual reciprocity, mutual understanding, but sometimes also standing in conflict with one another as well.
And at the end of the empire, were these things decided once and for all, or have any of these disputes continued beyond, the early 20th century?
Sorry, I didn't understand your last question.
Have any of these disputes continued into modern times?
Actually, I'm not very capable of the early 20th century. I'm not very, I don't have much idea about it, but till up to the 1915, 1910, in the first and second half of the 20th century, still there were these disputes actually. There were no concrete evidences that I can come across so far.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? Anyone else? So can I just ask, so your research is your thesis, part of your thesis, is that correct? Or do you have other lines of research?
Actually, this is not my part of thesis. It is just one of the earlier researches that I just delve into. Right now, I'm just working on focusing on the extradition practice in the Ottoman Empire, which is more related to the criminal law and international law, and also closely related to the diplomatic relations with the foreign states, which is about the extradition of the criminals from one state to another. This is one of the earlier experimental topic that I just was interested in the early periods, and I still have time to expand on this research.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for comments or questions to Berna? No? Okay, well, we'll call to an end unless there's anyone else.
I have a little question. Hello, this is Shebnam. Hi, everybody.
I see you.
Hi. I just wanted to ask if this gold map, 1905, does it have the section in the Jewish quarters in that detail?
No, this one just encompasses the seaside region of the...
All right. Yes, the key is okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any last questions or comments? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Berna. Excellent talk, very interesting and subject. Yeah, we look forward to staying in touch with you and seeing more of your work in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you everyone for attending. Well done. And we look forward to seeing you at our next talk in French by Philip Mansell on the 13th of April, if you are interested in that, or on the 22nd of April with Gianpaolo Salici. Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening.